When an elderly black woman walked into the restaurant she had founded, she was met with harsh disdain and rejection. The manager, unaware of who she was, turned her away, not realizing that this woman was the very heart of the establishment, the one who had built it from the ground up. But what happened next would shock even the most seasoned observers. But let's start from the beginning. Mavis woke up early, as she always did. Her day began with a cup of tea and the newspaper. She tried to live her life in a steady rhythm, despite her age. Her life had been full of struggles, but every new day was met with confidence. Today, she decided to visit the restaurant she and her husband had once founded, a local establishment that had become a part of her soul. Mavis and her husband had poured everything into this place, hard work, love, and ideas. But with his passing, the restaurant had become her sacred space. It was her legacy. On this particular day, despite the cool weather, the restaurant was packed. Karen, the new manager, stood at the counter, surveying the dining room. Confident she could handle the business, despite her youth and lack of experience, Karen was used to certain standards of service, focusing on the outward appearance of her customers rather than their stories. Mavis walked into the restaurant, her elegant demeanor immediately catching attention. As she passed by several tables, she approached the counter. Karen glanced up and, stifling a yawn, said flatly, "Hello, how can I help you?" Mavis, unfazed by the cold tone, simply asked, "A table by the window, please." Karen scanned the room. There were plenty of open seats, but she immediately acted as if the place was full. "We don't have any available seats right now. Perhaps try somewhere else." Mavis raised an eyebrow in surprise, but didn't argue. She glanced again at the vacant tables and said, "This place has always been special to me. I used to dine here often, ever since it first opened." Karen didn't respond. Her expression shifted slightly to one of disdain. "We're out of seating. Would you like to order something to go?" Mavis felt her politeness slipping away. She left money on the counter, turned, and silently walked out. But as she did, a strange sense of unease gripped her. In that moment, she realized she was being rejected. Karen didn't understand what had just happened until her eyes fell on a small sign by the door with the restaurant's logo. The words on the sign took her by surprise. "Founded by Mavis and Jeremy Jones." She stopped in her tracks, but it was too late. Karen froze, not understanding the significance of Mavis's words. She was used to her own authority, but this woman, with gray hair and a calm demeanor, stood before her as if embodying everything that was wrong with the restaurant. "Excuse me, what?" Karen asked, bewildered. Mavis remained calm, but her voice was firm. "I founded this restaurant, my husband and I. Everything you see here, it's ours, and you didn't even bother to learn that." The room fell silent. Diners began looking around. Some started tucking their phones into their pockets, while others watched the scene with growing interest. Karen could feel her confidence starting to crumble. She spoke politely, but with visible pride. "I'm not sure that matters. We can't serve you. Please leave." Mavis felt her patience wearing thin, but she still tried to avoid creating a scene. Instead of arguing, she turned to her friend Edith, who had been sitting at the table observing the exchange. Mavis said, "Darling, let's go. This person has no idea who she's dealing with." Karen was about to turn away when one of the customers stood up and, unable to hold back, said, "Are you out of your mind? This is Mavis Jones's restaurant. She ran everything here and you're kicking her out?" His words shocked Karen. She stood frozen, unable to believe what she had just heard. Mavis, ignoring the comment, turned and walked toward the exit. Karen nervously looked around. She saw people whispering, and some even pulled out their phones to record what was happening. The tension in the air was palpable. Mavis's story about the restaurant spread quickly, and soon the incident went viral on social media. Mavis calmly left the restaurant, leaving behind a confused Karen and onlookers who couldn't understand how it had all unfolded. But Karen couldn't stop herself. Shocked, she walked up to the counter and began dialing her superiors. One thought kept spinning in her mind. How could she not have known? A few hours after the incident, the video of Mavis was already viral. People on social media were discussing the event with outrage. Every post sparked heated debates. How could this happen in 2024? And Karen, do you even know who you're dealing with? Users wrote. At first, Karen tried to ignore it, convincing herself that the video would soon fade from the news cycle. But she was wrong. By the next day, the restaurant was surrounded by journalists. Mavis and her friend Edith had become media sensations, while Karen's name was now tied to a massive scandal. Was this deserved? Karen didn't know. She called her superiors again, who were clearly concerned. Within hours, she was called in for an urgent meeting. The management already knew about the incident and demanded an explanation. "Do you understand what's happening?" her director asked, holding up a printout of the video. Karen tried to justify herself. "I didn't know who she was. She just looked like an elderly customer. I didn't think it mattered." The director's lip curled. "It's not about whether it matters, Karen. It's about respect. You don't respect the history of this place. You don't respect the people. We're opening an investigation, and if we find you violated our principles, the consequences will be severe." Karen sat in silence, realizing that her future in the restaurant was now tied to how this case unfolded. Meanwhile, Mavis was not staying in the shadows. Soon, she gave an interview to the local news, calmly recounting her story with the restaurant and how she and her husband had invested everything to build it. She spoke about how, for years, the restaurant had not just been a place to eat, but a symbol of equality and support for their community. "I'm not looking for conflict," Mavis said in the interview, "but when you're humiliated, it needs to be exposed. We can't remain silent when we're erased from the map." Her words became the foundation of new discussions in the media. Society was divided. Some supported Mavis, others criticized Karen. But one thing was clear. The scandal was gaining momentum. People began condemning not just the manager's actions, but the restaurant itself for allowing this to happen. By the evening, Karen felt that she no longer controlled the situation. Her phone was flooded with messages. "You're fired!" and "Racism exposed." Under the pressure of public opinion and growing outrage, the restaurant's management made a decision. Karen would be fired. Meanwhile, the restaurant began receiving numerous inquiries from people wanting to know how they could support Mavis and restore justice to the business. Restaurants across the city started boycotting the establishment, demanding change. The outrage was so intense that even major media outlets took notice of the case, which quickly became a symbol of the fight for rights and respect. Karen realized that everything she had done had not only ruined her career, but had also destroyed the restaurant's reputation. She sat in her office, understanding that her actions couldn't be justified by any words. After Karen's firing and the restaurant's apology, the scandal didn't subside. Mavis became a symbol of the fight for justice. The video of her humiliation continued to spread across social media, and public outrage only intensified. People started demanding changes, not just from the restaurant, but from other businesses in the city. Mavis, realizing that her fight was not only for personal justice, but for changing social norms, decided to take further action. She organized a meeting with local activists and business owners from the Black community. Instead of simply demanding punishment for Karen, Mavis proposed constructive solutions to promote inclusivity in businesses, discussing the creation of standards that would ensure respect for every customer, regardless of their race. This meeting became the first step toward a new wave of consciousness among local business owners. Mavis also gave an interview on local TV, where she calmly explained how many years she and her husband had invested in building the restaurant. She emphasized that the fight against racism was not just a personal struggle, but a global issue that required action and change at the societal level. The interview went viral, inspiring many people, especially from her community, to actively participate in public affairs. Under pressure from public opinion, the restaurant decided to implement mandatory training for all staff to teach them about respect, inclusivity, and combating racism. The management invited Mavis to consult on creating new service standards. She agreed to help, knowing that her experience and influence could bring about real change. When Mavis returned to the restaurant as a consultant, she was greeted like a hero. The restaurant publicly apologized and began revising its internal policies to ensure that such mistakes would never happen again. Mavis developed a plan that included training and practical recommendations for the staff to eliminate bias. Slowly, the restaurant began to rebuild its reputation, and the staff started to understand the importance of respect and inclusivity. Meanwhile, Karen faced the consequences of her actions. Negative comments flooded her social media, and several restaurants refused to hire her. Her career came to an abrupt end, and public opinion condemned her. Public attempts to justify herself only worsened the situation, and her name became synonymous with prejudice and discrimination. Mavis, on the other hand, continued her work and became an important voice in her community. She not only restored her own reputation, but also played a key role in educational projects aimed at raising awareness about racism and bias. She began giving lectures and training sessions, emphasizing the importance of support, respect, and the impact of public opinion and action. Ultimately, Mavis's story became an example of how one woman could change a situation and influence social norms. Months later, the restaurant was not only a successful business, but also a model of how important it is to acknowledge mistakes, work on them, and change cultural standards. Mavis, steadfast in her principles, inspired many people to not only fight for their rights, but to strive for real societal change.